Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab, how you doing?
I'm good. Yourself?
Good.
Cool. So
Better
today's
now
going
that
to be better on the sun as possible. I'm back in my basement, so I have no idea what the weather's like outside.
the good
um,
weather in the basement.
so today's maybe a little bit of a different topic. It's just because I happened to land on two articles that really made me think over the past couple of weeks, and I wanted to get your point of view on it. And it's really kind of this idea of sales relationships versus sales data, for lack of a better word. So
Sure.
one article is an article by the Atlantic, and I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but the author was kind of arguing that baseball got boring, right? Because every team now is quote unquote moneyballing everything. So for anybody not familiar with the book or movie, is just the approach that baseball games can be won by looking at the data, right? So instead of like touchy feely, like which best player and this and that, you're gonna go more with their stats because there's so many stats in baseball. And again, I'm paraphrasing, and I'm not a baseball connoisseur or big fan in any way, shape, or form. But he was basically arguing that baseball got boring because of this. So every team's approach now is exactly the same, and there's basically no more art to the game. It's all a science thing. And in parallel, one of our old guests, Jon Selig, wrote an article about how he, like me, normally works with a lot of SaaS companies, and there's like usually SaaS companies are very like high pressure, a lot of very data driven sales approach, and therefore a lot of reliance on sales data, whether it's manually entered in the CRM or automatic, but the preference is obviously automatically entered into the CRM. But he went to a manufacturing trade show, which was, for all intents and purposes, the more traditional style of selling, right? Like big contracts, long sales cycles, very relationship driven. I'll extrapolate by saying no stable CRM entry process, no automation. And I've worked with that type of a sales team where they're like they didn't even want to log their emails into HubSpot. They're like, no, I'm just going to log it myself whenever I send an email. Like I don't want any automation going out. And I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition. And I'm like kind of asking myself, like, are we trying to make sales boring, quote unquote, to take that baseball article analogy? Like, should we? Is it a mistake that we're doing it? Is it a company thing? Like, what's your point of view on that? Because you obviously work with a lot of also more traditional teams, right? That have maybe that more relationship approach. Let's call it that, relationship
Yeah,
versus data approach.
I've worked with both sides of that spectrum. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to use the word boring because, I mean, it's an emotion, right? If you're bored. So to me, it's not about, and I don't mean to minimize what you're saying, but it's not about being bored or not. It's about what works, right?
I don't think they meant that the people themselves are bored. I think it's just like the game. Like I'm taking his wording from that article
Yeah.
about
No,
baseball.
and
Is
I
the
know what you're
game
saying.
got?
So is it,
Yeah.
so has the, well, if you look at the Moneyball approach, if we take the baseball analogy for a second, the fact that it's so data driven, what it's done is it's sort of evened out the playing field, right? So
Hmm.
at first it was just, was it the Boston Red Sox or something that did it, and they started doing better? For it what team it was, but and it got a lot better.
The Oakland. Yeah.
Oh, it was Oakland, okay, and they
And
got a
then
lot
they moved to baseball and to Boston and all that stuff. But yeah,
better. Yeah,
Oakland still.
exactly. So essentially what you're saying is that what they did worked. So I think the answer is a little bit in what you're saying, is that okay, it as a maybe as a consumer of that sport, it gets a little boring. But as far as being the team owner and the success, so if you look at sales and you look at the salespeople and the success of the team, if it goes up, well, then if your ultimate goal is to maximize the efficiency of your activity and your methodology to create hopefully more results, if you're super data driven and it's working, I mean, yeah, it might be boring to the old school salesperson who used to like to go out and wine and dine and play golf and whatnot. But if the way I would say it is, I'd put it like this, honestly. If you say to someone, so look, you used to go out wine and dine and you had a whole sort of approach that was much more relationship driven, and you got, X result. And now what we've seen is with the data approach and the, very methodical optimization, everything goes along with the data. You're managing to get the same results in 4 days. Well, then take your 5th day for fun, goofy activities. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of counterintuitive to say that, well, look, let's make it a little bit less efficient. We'll have fun all the time. But what if you were more efficient part of the time, and then you can create fun activities like, these super modern companies, these SaaS companies are saying, okay, so yeah, we're not doing as much whining and dining, but we're having this great, fun day once a month, and we have pool tables in the office. So I don't think the efficiency has to take away from the funness. Do you know what I'm saying? And you're right.
Yeah.
Some industries, some industries, the traditional sales model is expected because the buyers at the other end expect that. So if you're in an industry that is still more traditional and they expect to be wined and dined and they expect to be brought out to golf and they, then you have to follow the flow of your client expectations. But if your client expectations don't exist,
but I mean, I don't see that as necessarily mutually exclusive, right? If part of your sales is because your clients expect to be wine and dine and all that stuff, like maybe that's is what you're saying, that it's hard to size that for a lot of, like when you're in SaaS, like people are expecting to have the Zoom meetings and the virtual demos and but yeah, like if people are expecting to be wine and dine, couldn't you size that as well?
I think you can do both. That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying, if you can create efficiency and processize your whining and dining and your customer experience, go for it. Like if you can create efficiency, you should always do it. I mean, a very, very silly basic example would be if you're, if let's say you wine and dine someone 3 times a week and you've got to go on the road and they're in a certain part of town. Well, at least what you could do is say, okay, well, we'll do it all within the same 2 days. I'll do 2 lunches and 1 dinner, and I'll fly to that city and I'll do it all in 1 day, rather than, sort of doing it willy-nilly all over the place. Like you can still create process, organization, and a certain amount of intelligence of what's going on. You can still think of your, the way, the questioning, the way you're going to do it. You can still enter that stuff in your CRM. Like there's ways of, like you're saying, to balance it, to take the best of both worlds. And if that means, well, we're very efficient when we work, and then, more often, instead of doing the golf tournament once a year, now we do an event every month. We do volleyball, and then we do the golf in the summer. We go skiing, because the other part is a lot more efficient. And if the client likes that, it's like, well, it makes sense. If the client says, no, I want it the traditional well, you got to see how you can, decide whether you want to work with that client and see how it makes sense for them. So I don't think it's one or the other, but I think to ignore one or the other is a mistake, because they both have some value in what they're doing, right? And sorry, I'm rambling on here, but one more thing. You can't really compare it to, I don't think you can compare it as much to the baseball Moneyball analogy, because people go see baseball, they want some entertainment. They want some crazy grand slams. They want some bad moves. They want people to make mistakes. They don't always want it to be, whatever the baseball scores are, even, and it comes down to one, like, 1 inning and it's all, they don't want that. They want the excitement. So maybe the excitement's gone, it's like in hockey, you don't see a lot of breakaways anymore. Remember in this, I don't know, you were very young in the 70s, but so was I. But I remember, you watch old 70s.
I wasn't born in the 70s, but it's okay.
Right. And I remember watching like mid 70s hockey games, and like the guy would get the puck, he wasn't wearing a helmet, and like, I was super young watching, it'd be super exciting. You get the huge breakaway. Well, you don't see that as much anymore. You don't see the breakaways. So but
yeah,
you can't compare it to an entertainment. I don't think you can compare it to an entertainment sport, because that's what baseball, hockey, music.
Yeah.
You can say the same thing about music, Fab.
Sure.
A lot of top 40 music now is totally formulaic. They pretty much it's not, you've got some people that are a lot better. I'm into music, so you have some people that are good at in the pop format, but some people are just like, rehashing formula stuff, and they're doing okay. But that's
Yeah,
entertainment. Sales, I don't think, is about entertainment. I don't know. Maybe
that's a
I'm wrong.
valid point. Yeah, I think the entertainment part is maybe not what it was. I think it's just more the result. I think like what I was kind of hearing within those two articles is that like it's not necessarily the entertainment part. It's more the matter of like there's kind of the human approach, which allows you to have these breakaways, right? Signing that crazy deal, right? Out of the blue, Paul comes in, like Paul is like this black box of sales magic, right? Like he gets somebody, he sells it, and nobody really knows what they did. And then you have the more formulaic approach to sales, right? Like like first you prep your call, then you have your discovery call, and here are all the steps that you have to cover in your discovery calls, and you shouldn't have more than 2 meetings. If you have more than 2 meetings, that's becoming inefficient. And you have all those steps basically that a rep follows, and so there's a lot less room. Yes, you'll still have reps that get it and will maybe do it a bit more intuitively, and some reps will just have to be trained more and coached more.
The problem with
But
intuitive fab is it's not repeatable. So
yeah,
let's say that Paul guy, it certainly wouldn't be me because I'm pretty organized. Let's say the Paul guy comes in and just wings it, and he doesn't even know what he did. Well, it's a one shot. You can't learn from it. It doesn't really help you. And you don't know. Maybe the client, he just got lucky because the client that day was in the right mood. He didn't ask enough questions. He did a sales pitch. It closed, right away. It wasn't the 6-month cycle. It was like a 1-week cycle. But if you don't analyze what happened, it's kind of useless. You know what I mean? It's sort of like saying, I managed to hit the perfect golf. I hit 300 yards. I've only done that once in my life. I came in and I go, I had a beer after lunch. I was chilled out and I just hit 300 yards. Oh yeah, what'd you do? I have no clue. All right, well, you'll never hit it again. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's like it doesn't. So to me, as much as I'm a passionate guy and I love fun things, and if I go to a baseball game, I would want it to be exciting. I wouldn't want it to be boring. And if I go to a hockey game, I want it to be crazy and fun. When it comes to sales, I think it's a different thing. It's not. It's sort of like saying, okay, we're a manufacturer, and today we're going to do whatever. We're going to see what comes out at the end of the product line. We're going to just throw a bunch of stuff in there, and we're going to see what the guy will say. Well, you know what? It might not work so well. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So to me, that's why I think you've got to understand what you do, and that's why it needs to be processed. You need to understand what makes you good, even as a salesman. You need to understand, and it doesn't mean it has to be boring. You still need relationship. You still need connection, communication, interaction. But it definitely, you definitely have to understand what's going on. You and I have talked about this a lot. When you talk about open-ended questions, well, understanding and learning to ask an open-ended question leads to really exciting and fun conversations. So it can be fun and organized. That's my point.
Yeah. No, and I hear what you're saying. Obviously, like that's, I tend to agree with that, given that I'm more on the operational side of things, and it's really hard to even to a certain extent even forecast your revenue when you're going purely on intuition, or when your team is purely in that intuition relationship, where we called it for the show relationship mindset, where it's like it's not really clear what's going to close when, because there's just no process to it. And are you doing it the best way possible? Obviously there's different realities. Obviously there's a change management involved if you're dealing with a team that's been doing things more intuitively, let's call it that, or relationship driven, and now you're kind of asking them to follow a process, and you have to be mindful of that. And maybe it's not like rolling out like a massive HubSpot instance with all these properties that they need, like, okay, let's go, peel back the onion layer by layer, right? Let's just start with you entering your deals and so on and so forth. But yeah, but that's what I'm understanding that you're saying as well, right? There's value there for a company. And if we continue that parallel with the baseball team, is like there's value for the team in maximizing your wins through stats, let's say. And at the end of the day, sure, maybe a sliver of hardcore baseball fans might say the game's changed, right? In the same way that a hockey game is different in 1976 than it is in 2022. But at the end of the day, like, fans like winning teams, right? And if your best chance of winning is by optimizing through stats, then that's better for most people, I would say.
Let's go down that sports analogy for a second. So actually, I disagree with you that fans like winning teams, because no offense to the Toronto Maple Leafs, but they haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1967. And they're still
right. But imagine, I guess what I'm saying is the bulk of
the franchise that makes the most money, and they're
Yeah.
still the ones that probably have the strongest fans. So in that case, so think of this. Sales to me is like the Toronto Maple Leafs without the fans. So take away the fans, because the management of the Maple Leafs are probably using a little bit of a Moneyball data thing, and they're probably saying, well, what can we do to maximize whatever it is? And so they may have figured out that they don't need to win that much, so they only spend so much on players. They know that the fans are still going to stay, so they know that we don't have to win Stanley Cups. We don't have to get all the A players, because we're making a ton of money. You know, the number one franchise in hockey is not the one that wins the most. So like if you're a businessman and you're investing in that, like, the fans are coming anyways. We're just about keeping it equal. So they figured out their formula. But let's take it out of that for a second. Let's say as an owner, or not as an owner, but let's say as a manager of the team, and your owner all the owner wants is for you to win. So you say, okay, you're doing the whole Moneyball thing. The fans thinks it's boring like crazy, but the owner just wants you to win. He doesn't want you to give exciting ball games. He wants you to win because he knows if you get to this much and whatever, it makes more money somehow. Well, then that's what a company's doing. A company doesn't have an audience of fans watching in, wanting it to be exciting. That's basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think. Also, I know this is not a sports show by any stretch of the imagination, but
it's whatever you want it to be.
There's a difference between a Toronto Maple Leafs, like an original six in hockey, or a New York Yankees or whatnot, and let's say in hockey still the Phoenix Coyotes, right? Like, they would probably have a lot more revenue if they had a winning team. You know, obviously some teams have that history. Like, in some ways that a brand will have, you know, like an Apple, very different than, you know, some other smaller cell phone provider, right? Or HT, or I don't know if about cell phone providers, but so there is also that brand component to it that is at play in there. But you're right. There's no fans. There's no excitement. I think what I was trying to question you about is more about, you know, like, are we getting to a point where we need to make sales boring? And like, companies need to understand that, you know, startups are doing it, and some are not doing it very well, right? Like, it's still a learning curve, but companies need to understand that slowly but surely every industry needs to get this data playbook. Not that relationships aren't important, but it can't be relationship driven anymore. It can't be unpredictable anymore. We have to try to build in some predictability into our sales approach, because then, especially like today, right, we're possibly entering a difficult economic conditions. When there's no predictability, then it becomes really hard for a business to decide where to invest down the line, right? Because if things were going well when Paul could do whatever he wanted and somehow sales were coming in, but then the economy is not so hot anymore, and then the sales aren't coming in, Paul's still just doing whatever he wants. It's like, how do we is that just the reality of the market? Is there something that we could be doing differently? Like, that's what I'm trying to see is like,
yeah, and you're right, Fab. I think what you're talking about is tradition, and what people perceive the romantic image of that, you know, that salesperson, that B2B salesperson that goes on the road and, you know, has, you know, lunches and conversations and closes deals. And if that works for you, if you've tried basically what I would say to a business owner is, what works best? If you've got 10 reps on the road and they're whining and dining, and you're making your quotas and it's crazy, and you've tried some stuff, and let's say you've got 10 reps that are like that, more traditional, and you've got 5 reps that are in-house, and they can't even come close to those guys on the road. Well, then you know your answer. Now, vice versa, if you got 10 reps on the road and you got your 5 internal sales reps that are just making phone calls and they're booking, 70% of the business, or even 60% of the business. Your guys on the road are just like holding on and they're booking, 50%, but they're twice as big a team and they cost you 3 times more. It's a business, it's a business. Yeah. And the romantic view, that salesperson might not like it. That guy in his mid-50s saying, yeah, I've been doing this forever and it works. Well, I'm sorry, the little 25-year-old's like whipping your butt and doing the other process. Well, then as a business owner, it's like, well, what do my clients really want? Like I lived this in media. When I started media in the late 90s, I was supposed to wine and dine. I hated it, by the way, but I was supposed to wine and dine every week. And, I got fat and, well, for me, I became overweight. I became unhealthy and I didn't like that lifestyle, but that's what was expected of me. Well, shortly thereafter, in like, I'd even say as soon as 98, 99, there's a huge wave that started changing and people were doing much more business on the phone and using software a lot more to interact. And it became way more efficient. And for people that adjusted, I remember a few of the old guys, oh, it's not the same anymore. We used to do a deal like order with a napkin. It's like, yeah, but it was stupid. You've got all these tools now and you can't do anymore. So, go do your napkin deals. Well, and what they did is they packaged all these people out and they created efficiency. Now competition was moving in, like the whole industry changed. Of course, you've got some people that are saying, "Oh, it used to be wonderful," but you know what? It had to change, because if it didn't change, and those that didn't, there's a few companies that don't exist anymore, went straight down the tube. Was it only because of sales? No, there's probably some bad decisions, but I mean, production decisions. But I'm sure it didn't help. If you've got a very inefficient, costly way of doing business, because ultimately, if I'm the CEO, I'm going to say, okay, what's my cost of sales here? Okay, these guys are costing me 15% of sales. They bring in 50% of my sales. So their cost to run their entity is 15%. These guys over here are costing me 5%, and they're bringing me now you might have some clients that say, I insist on doing it the old way. That's all right. But then you've got you've got to look at the numbers. It's not about how the individual feels. You got to look at the numbers. And that's where I think there are some industries that are still whining and dining and they do it well. And they only might need 4 or 5 big deals a year. And they're in an industry where relationship is really important because there's stiff competition and it's almost like a high-end commodity. And ultimately, you're making your decision based on relationship. Well, then they'll continue that way. Or if you're in a very SaaS-driven new type of business where there's a huge amount of competition and it's just really fast turnover, then you've got to do it that way. But you got to look at what the numbers tell you. That's my opinion. And to me, if I was a CEO, I'd say, look at the numbers. What's your cost of sale and how much of the percentage are they bringing in, and try both ways.
Yeah. And I mean, you could even, speaking to some owners, or maybe not owners, but presidents and CEOs, they don't even have the numbers, right? And I think that's the first indication that there's something afoot, right? And I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, you're running a business, and if you can't get your numbers, then you need to, something's off, and you need to start collecting those numbers, and that probably means heading more towards a data-driven approach. And I agree, like some industries for sure are probably going to stay very relationship-driven for a very foreseeable future, right? Because like you mentioned, a high-end commodity but even that, you could potentially argue that can be dethroned, right? Like you can argue that a book might have been maybe not a high-end commodity, but and a lot of independent bookstores got pushed out when these big box bookstores and the Amazons came in, because even though you can no longer get your personalized recommendations, well, algorithms can start giving you personalized recommendations, if just as well, if not better. And yeah, you could lament the years gone and how fun it was to have your little shop and maybe there was a coffee machine there and you would just chat about books.
The only people that will lament are the people over 40. The young people haven't experienced that. They love the algorithms because they're suggested things. I mean, I think you and I are pretty modern. I don't miss the day where I went in the bookstore and the one person gave me a suggestion. I way rather look at 100 reviews online, do it quickly, and order my book and have it delivered to my house. And there's a coffee shop in my neighborhood, and I go there to have coffee. And I bring my book. I don't have to buy a book at my coffee shop. So it's more of a romanticized. So I think what we're really saying, Fab, is that if a certain model works better and it's old, it can still be good. If a certain model is new and it works not as well, well, then it's bad. So it's not about whether the model is old or new. It's about the efficiency of that model. That's what I would say to any CEO. That's what I'd say to any CRO. That's what I'd say to any VP sales. I'd say, don't be biased on the age of the model. Just see which model works best for you. Because, hey, if you're selling to a bunch of 65-year-old people who want to be wined and dined and will only buy from you in that reason, then then you've got to do that.
Yeah. But on the flip side, like we said, that doesn't mean that can't be processized, right? Like there could be, it could just mean that, you're not a Zoom demo type of organization, whatever, you're still wining and dining, but you're still tracking like how many meetings did we have, what's our relationship with them, how are we gauging the relationship with them. It's still doable. It's just different than what we see a lot of SaaS companies talking about.
And quick tangent. Like I said, when I started in sales, there was a lot of that. And what I saw is that a lot of people in large corporations, when you're down at when you're a salesperson starting out in a large corporation, there's a distance from you and the big boss. And when you have those expense accounts, when you have that freedom, unfortunately came with it a lot of abuse. To the point where I would say up to 50% of the expense account, which was huge sometimes, was so I understand those companies when the bean counters came in and said, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. And when they started cutting, so you're right. If you processize it and it makes sense and you continue, and I know there's still in the finance world, got a few friends in the finance world, very high-end finance world. They're still wining and dining to an extent, but it's very processized because they're talking about very specific things. They're going out to fancy restaurants, but they're doing business, So do you have to do it? I think if you've got you and I said it just before the show. I said, hey, Fab, I had a really crappy shirt on this. I'm going to go change my shirt before we start this. And you said, Paul, there's no such thing as casual. It doesn't matter how you dress. My shirt was really, all wrinkled. It didn't look as good as your T-shirt, we'll say. So that's an impression, right? So if you're dealing with, let's say we're dealing with someone who's very traditional, who's like, a 70-year-old CEO, and he meets me and you, hey, I can't believe that guy came to a sales meeting in a T-shirt. And you're saying brilliant stuff, and the guy's not listening to you because you're wearing a T-shirt. Well, okay, that's an emotion. But let's say you're saying brilliant stuff, and the old guy goes, hey, that crazy kid in the T-shirt saying really brilliant stuff. I don't care if he comes in naked. I want to do business with him. But you know what I'm saying is that at one point you've got to judge as a person running a business. You've got to decide what makes sense. And because you have access to all this data today, and you have access to managing data, and you have access to automation, which really, and dashboards and data analysis that gives you wonderful stats on things, well, use it to your advantage to decide which techniques are best, whether they're old or not. If you try stuff and you say, okay, we take out our top 10 clients 3 times a year to really fancy restaurants. And we found that has increased their loyalty because we're in a very commodity-driven business. Damn, keep doing it. But like you said, make a process of it. Have it in so you can still processize that. So I think we're saying the same thing.
No, I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, the data. I think that's what the Moneyball approach was, right? It's about looking at data to determine what the best player is, and we might not have public stats on salespeople, but you definitely have internal stats. And if you're like, okay, well, Paul's a good, and let's not get into the whole closer opener discussion, but good closer, right? He's really good at taking the puck and scoring basically. And Fav's really like horrible at closing. Like he just doesn't get that part of that conversation, but he's really great at getting people on the phone. Let's maybe reshift things, or let's get more Favs because we need to build Paul's pipeline more. Let's get more Pauls because Fav's just filling up too much. Within that, Paul could still be going out to restaurants or hockey games, and Fav could still be working an hour a day if that's what's making it work. Like that doesn't matter. But yeah, cool.
That's very interesting. But I have to say that in my practical experience, and I don't know about yours, but in my practical experience, there's very few of the old school wine and dines that are still doing well. And the ones that are doing well usually are the owners of the company.
That are doing well or are not doing well?
Yeah, the ones that are doing well, that still do the wine and dine because they are using it to its maximum. They know they're paying out of their own pocket. They're running the show. They're going to meet someone. It's very different. But honestly, when too low level, like when I was a sales rep selling to, I don't want to say low level, but let's say down the hierarchy, a salesperson taking a media buyer out, and I was bringing the hockey game, it didn't mean I was going to get more business. I even remember back then some buyers saying to me, I need more tickets. I need to be taken up more. If you want a higher share, like that's a terrible buyer. I mean, what are you doing for your client saying, I'm going to buy more of you because I'm Mr. Klein. I'm going to buy more of this because that sales rep brought me to the hockey game more often.
Yeah, fair. Although when I was in the media space, I did enjoy the hockey games. But I think that's the difference, right? Is that you're doing it for yourself.
People, when you were in that media space on the agency side, would you have given someone more business because they brought you to a hockey game?
No, it's just it helps you stay top of mind. But if at the end of the day, the media that they're representing is not a good fit for whatever campaign you had, because at the end of the day, you're the one, you directly or you, a colleague, is directly accountable to your client, right? And so if we place it on media A, that's just not the right audience, but media A brings us out to hockey games all the time. Somebody at the end of the day is going to have to present those numbers and that plan to the client, and the client's going to push back and being like, why are we spending there when we could be spending here instead?
And what's the value? And a very anecdotal example of that is, when I was a VP somewhere in my past, there were some people making an inordinate amount of, paying huge amounts of commission. And we packaged them out. We replaced them with much more junior people that had more approach. And those senior people said, you'll see your business is going to go down. Well, the business didn't go down. The business actually went up because those junior people actually worked hard rather than just going out and take people to, so listen, it's very anecdotal, and you can't use that in a study, but, from experience over 30 years, for me, I find the new way of doing business, the data driven, is much more efficient. It doesn't mean you don't build a relationship, but it's not in a vacuum somewhere.
It's just not relationship driven, right? It's about
50 years ago, if you wanted to get a municipal contract in most places in North America, the municipal, or 70 years or 100 years ago, then the municipal guy would open the drawer and you'd drop some money in there. Well, process, transparency, there's a lot less of that than there used to be. Well, you know what? Sales was a little bit the same way back then. Hey man, you want the contract? Like I remember the Olympic Stadium. Some guys were having swimming pools built with the cement that was supposed to go to the Montreal Olympic Stadium. When you don't have transparency, when you just base yourself on relationship, it becomes a little bit dog eat dog, unless you're super honest. And I'm sure there were some very honest people, but usually when you start going free reign, you start getting some weird things happening. So I like data. I like data. Nice. I like relationship. And I don't think one has to be but you need data, you need transparency to keep you honest. And that's why sales is also, people don't see sales as negatively as they used to see it 20, 30 years ago. Salespeople are perceived, it's not as negative a thing because, you don't have shysters not as many shysters as you used to have. Anyway, I'm totally off my thing.
No, this is really good.
Yeah,
This is interesting. I don't know if people got value out of it, but I thought it was an interesting
I
conversation.
hope
I
so.
think it's
I hope
definitely an
you got
interesting
value out of it.
conversation for people that are less in the SaaS space. Something to think about. I hope if anybody's going to take away anything from this episode is that if you're not data driven SaaS, whatever is, do I need to start building that out more? And I think if you're in SaaS, I think if you listen all the way to the here, to get my royal conclusion is that, are we measuring the right things, right? Because there's also data for the sake of data, and the Moneyball approach is about looking at the right data at the right moments and stuff like that.
I just thought of it. One last amazing analogy. Can I please put it out there?
Yeah, go for it.
You cut me off. Fab's the one who's got the cutoff button. So think of Stradivarius violins. Okay, they did it in a very old traditional way 500 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And it's been mostly lost. But imagine if back then you had the data, been able to collect it, and then today you could take whatever is possible to be produced by a machine, because a lot of the wood carving and all that stuff, and even the gluing, could be done by a machine. And then you could get the secret sauce that Stradivari used to mix to make the varnish and the glue, even, and what kind of trees you took. Well, you could have a perfect world of taking whatever Stradivari did, reproducing it in a manufacturing process, and instead of just having hundreds of great Stradivari violins, you could have hundreds of thousands of Stradivari violins. So everyone in the world who's a violinist could profit from having a beautiful violin that sounds like the Stradivarius, right? So that's my analogy.
Yeah, no, that's a good analogy. And I mean, again, we could go far, but I started, like a lot of North Americans during COVID, got into Formula One. And I mean, if you look at a lot of the history, and some teams were saying, like some of the older teams were saying that, it just used to be a bunch of guys who liked mechanics and driving fast cars. And I mean, now it's a completely different game, right? It's like beyond that.
Yeah.
All right, Paul, this has been fun.
We'll have to wedge that one in next time. I love that. I watched the whole Formula One series. Okay.
Nice.
Ciao,
Very cool.
See you next time.
Bye, Paul. Take care.
Bye.